the World this week in partnership with the International Herald Tribune. Eric Fanner is here with us, also with us from the Sunday Telegraph, and Elisabeth Boutet. Celestine Bolen is also with us, and Stefan de Vries of RTL4 in the Netherlands. Before we move on, just a couple of your comments regarding the situation in Europe after that crucial summit on Thursday. Don from Montreal says what we have is a lot more money being thrown at Greece and a rather fuzzy voluntary involvement of the private sector. I wonder what the various countries had to offer the banks to partake in this, but we will not know if it's a success until it's shown that Greece can pull itself up by its bootstraps. Katya says, I think the EU summit was just a breather for now. Then we're all going to be panting again with the worst economic crisis. That was on Twitter. Speaking of Twitter, our own Douglas Herbert from the International Affairs Desk this morning said, take note, when Obama needed to call Europe earlier in the week to talk debt crisis, he dialed Angela Merkel. Sorry, Nicolas. So that definitely interesting points there regarding that summit. And again, a story that's not going to go away. A story that's not going to go away either, by the way, is that you can find on the front page of The Economist this week, where it shows Rupert Murdoch, and there's the headline, Last of the Moguls. And it's interesting because there was still a certain aura when the 80-year-old Rupert Murdoch seated himself beside his son James to answer questions in the UK Parliament on Tuesday.
Amended that.
Of the News of the World newspaper.
Before you get to that, I would just like to say one sentence. This is the most humble day of my life.
Okay, thank you.
The most humble day of his life. It may have been the most humble day of his life, but it seems as though, as well, there was a lot of selective amnesia that ensued, Anne-Elisabeth Moutet.
Well, it's actually, I think there was more selective amnesia when his chief executive, Rebecca Brooks, was just testifying that same day in front of Parliament. It's very obvious that you have this man who is still, by all accounts, including his biographers, very sharp. He walks in, he stopped dyeing his hair, he is 80, his son is sort of helping him, and you've got this image which is relentlessly fostered of this doddering old man that it would be impolite to question too fully, and his son, who's a new media person, who says, what newspapers? I didn't even know we had newspapers almost. But at the same time, you can sort of take some of what they said, as credible. The fact that the News of the World was 1% of the Murdoch empire, that there are many interests on 4 continents. You can sort of loosely believe it. Believe that the chief executive of the UK press subsidiary, where the biggest earner was the News of the World, did not know what was going on at the News of the World, which he had edited a few years before. That, to my mind, beggars belief. I don't think it's possible.
What's interesting is they were speaking to the same panel, which in 2009 had looked into the same exact charges. And yet, here they were again. And we can look perhaps at the front page of today's newspapers in Britain, The Guardian, which broke the phone hacking story, where it says that 2 former senior executives of the now defunct News of the World are contradicting what James Murdoch told in testimony. The former editor and in-house lawyer say they informed James Murdoch as early as 2009 that phone hacking was not limited to a single rogue reporter. There's the testimony given to Tom Watson, a Labour MP, whose garbage they went through when he tried to challenge them last time around. And there you see that there's a contradiction there to that. You really have the impression, Eric Fanner, that the drip is going to continue.
But yeah, this is the problem with the way the Murdochs have handled this and their company. It's a little bit like the European leaders kind of handling the Euro crisis. I mean, the more they get up there and kind of reassure everybody that no, everything is fine, we didn't know anything, the more people start to question them. Now it looks like James Murdoch is going to get a return date in Parliament to answer questions about this kind of seeming inconsistency, or at least the contradiction by his former employees who are contradicting him. At some point, they're going to have to own up to just what happened, I think, and how much they knew and when they knew it. It doesn't seem like that's happened yet, unless somebody's lying. Both sides could be, I suppose. We don't know that just yet. But that's the problem. Until they do that, this thing is going to keep going. The front pages, I mean, the rivals like The Guardian obviously are eager to pursue this as long as they can, and so that we're going to keep seeing headlines for them.
And it's not just The Guardian. Anne-Elisabeth Moutet will not disagree with me that the Daily Telegraph has also been very strong on this story. And an allusion to the heckler, by the way, who disrupted the hearing by trying to throw a pie at Murdoch. There was the front page the following day. That was Wednesday.
We've had a run of really good headlines at the Telegraph, I must say.
And Murdoch eating humble pie, but again, humility is a relative concept when you're talking about a man who's built such a big global media empire.
This terrible thing happened on your watch. Mr. Murdoch, have you considered resigning?
No.
Why not?
Because I feel that people I trusted, I'm not saying who, I don't know what level, have let me down, and I think they behaved disgracefully and betrayed the company and me, and it's for them to pay. I think that, frankly, I'm the best person to clean this up.
He's the best person to clean this up. Celestine Bolen?
Well, I mean, I think, the cover of The Economist that you were pointing out suggests that not very many people agree with him. I mean, at the end of the day, this may be the end of Murdoch, and that's not a bad thing in the sense that just even as he speaks, he says, he let me down. No, wait a minute. I mean, let readers down, let the company down. But this kind of personalization, this patriarchal kind of approach, which appears, I mean, which he used.
Shareholders saying News International for years has underperformed when you look at other media stocks. Right,
and that, I mean, in fact, the article in The Economist sort of goes on to say that actually investors or see all of this as a kind of blessing in disguise, because at the end of the day, he may go. And I think the other thing is just yeah, exactly. That's what I'm saying. But the thing is, I think it's also the personalization. Again, the media baron, the media mogul, the man who walks in through the back door at Downing Street. That day is over. He's becoming a kind of a.
I disagree. I think we've seen newspapers and press empires being run by hedge funds and financiers, and frankly, they do not produce good press. They do not produce good media. This is a tragedy because this was incredibly criminal. I have a personal disclosure to make. I used to work for the Murdoch Press in the 80s. I used to work for the Sunday Times in London, and the man is a real journalist. The man is a genius. It's extremely sad to see this. It is tragic. It's because it's unforgivable. But if he will be replaced by people who will be less good at this than he is.
But brought on, I would argue, by hubris. I mean, and that's the point.
We credit it.
There are other ways of having press ownership that's not a hedge fund, but that doesn't involve this kind of I am the king kind of approach.
It's part of the makeup. Opposite that, you've got the Scott Trust who are running The Guardian. You've got, and that is very good and quite remarkable. They're not running it terribly well, but it is a fascinating paper. I mean, they are in the red all the time, but it is a fascinating paper. But there is a place for that kind. I wouldn't like to see all moguls disappear. Not everything should be run by moguls, but I could argue that Murdoch made it possible for other newspapers, including newspapers that are now attacking him, to exist in Britain, such as The Independent, because without what he did when he killed the print unions and he stopped their stranglehold on press finance in the mid-'80s, and I was there in the middle, so I remember this very strongly, papers like The Independent would not have come out and existed. So in many ways, we have to acknowledge that kind of achievement at the same time that we look at possibly its demise right now.
There's clearly a strategy here on the part of Murdoch, who one shouldn't underestimate at any point, even at 80 years old, to kind of ride this out as long as you can. At some point, this is potentially going to turn into a broader scandal for Fleet Street more widely.
And at the end of the day, the prize is broadcast. It's no longer print media.
Well, right. I mean, they've had to give up on the B-Sky-B deal in the short term, at least. You never know; that could come back. Murdoch could revive it if he becomes 81 or 82. And that's as he said, News of the World was 1% of the company. B-Sky-B, I mean, even now is effectively controlled by News Corporation.
But if these allegations of a black ops unit at Fox News prove to be true, will that be the final nail in the coffin?
We'll have to see. I mean, obviously, that's not the only potential threat in the U.S. There's subpoenas going out apparently on the phone hacking as well. So I think
foreign corrupt practices.
That's right. Yeah.
Which is an interesting approach that the Americans are saying. You know, they bribe the police, and therefore it's through this rather odd and one wouldn't think appropriate angle, but that the Americans are getting involved.
And anything that happens in the States is going to affect the share price probably a lot more dramatically than anything that happens in the UK.
Now, by the way, it wasn't just Rupert Murdoch that faced the music this week. David Cameron cutting short a scheduled trip to Africa to answer charges. His defense? To remind his peers that Murdoch was just as cozy with the likes of Tony Blair and Gordon Brown.
Whereas Rebekah Brooks was invited 6 times a year to number 10 Downing Street under both the former Prime Ministers, she hasn't been invited to number 10 Downing Street by me. Now, of course, I have set out the great contrast. The great contrast is I have set out all of the contacts and meetings that I've had in complete contrast to the party opposite. And I can say this to the honourable gentleman, I've never held a slumber party or seen her in her pyjamas.
Stefan de Vries, we've talked about the impact that this whole scandal is going to have on the media. What about on politics?
Yeah, I find it all very fascinating. I mean, every summer we have like a summer TV series, and I think that we had DSK, that became boring, although it becomes interesting again right now. But now we have this.
Switch till next court date.
Yes, exactly. I watched the hearings this week with a lot of fascination, and I wonder when the Rupert Murdoch's wife will be cast in the next James Bond film. But that's a whole different debate. It will have an impact on especially the relations between the media and politics.
A positive or a negative one?
Well, it depends on how you stand in the world. I mean, I think a positive one because it will become more healthy, or I hope so. I mean, in France, the relations between the press and the politics are very, how do you say it?
Cozy.
Well, yeah, cozy, Sarkozy, as well. And I had to have a lot of respect for the British press compared to the French press. Because it's a country that produces the best newspapers in the world, but also the worst newspapers in the world. And actually, I'm quite surprised by the fact that the relations between politics and press are so intimate as they are in France, which I don't have a very high esteem of. So I will follow this with a lot of interest.
You know, I'd like to quote a French politician about the Murdoch press in the early 90s when there was the campaigning leading up to the Maastricht Treaty. And The Sun, which is the daily newspaper sister to the now defunct News of the World, had a huge front page headline that said on all the front page, "Up yours, Delors." Yeah. And they said, you know, Sun readers, gather on the cliffs of Dover, and if we all shout it out together, the French will hear it, which was a bit of a joke because nobody takes this entirely seriously. You must not take the tabloids entirely seriously. Everybody knows it's a bit of a laugh. Anyway, I had occasion to interview Delors shortly after that, and I said, "Monsieur Delors, what do you think of this?" And he said, "You know, Britain is the only country that has had a popular grassroots debate on European policy, and everywhere else it's just been imposed from above. So actually, I think it's very healthy." And I thought, you know, kudos to Delors because he got the point.
Now, earlier we talked about, speaking of Delors, we talked about the summit in Brussels. The French are used to summits in July. And even though no Frenchman has won the Tour de France since 1985, and it's not going to happen again this year, still one of their own wore the overall leader's yellow jersey for 10 days with suspense till the end. Favorites without an armada of teammates to tow them up the mountains. Riders who go up big climbs 3 minutes slower than they did a decade ago. Eric Fanner, you had the privilege of covering the Tour this year. 3 questions. Is there a Santa Claus? Is there an Easter Bunny? And can I believe in cycling again?
Well, certainly the 10-day run that Tommy Voeckler has had would there certainly are whisperings that maybe you should be believing in it because of his performance, a bit unexpected that he would do so well. On the other hand, in the last few days, he's obviously today lost the yellow jersey. Some of the favorites have come back.
Is it a cleaner sport?
I would certainly, I don't have the history with it necessarily to know exactly what was going on. I certainly get the impression it was. I think the drug testing has, certainly you get the assurances that drug testing has improved. They're slower going up the Col du Tourmalet, the Col du Galibier, that sort of thing than they were 10 years ago, as you said. So I don't know. I don't think the athletes have gotten worse. So something has changed.
And they said the sport wouldn't survive once Lance Armstrong was no longer there. What was your feeling being out there?
Well, there's some new stars. I mean, obviously, Tommy Voeckler was a great story for France. Andy Schleck yesterday was incredible. The Contador story was interesting. He had a bit of a ride today, but he's not going to win this year, it looks like. So enough kind of interesting stories. It was a great tour so far because of everything kind of being concentrated at the end. So.
All right, so a good news story. I have a question for you, Stéphane de Vries. Eric saw, no doubt, all the Basque supporters when he was in the Pyrenees Mountains.
I had to fight them up the mountain.
Why are there so many Dutch people who go to the Alps to watch the Tour de France, who camp out for 3 days on the Alps?
It's funny, I'm watching the images, and they're all flags of the area I was born in, because the guy who fell into who was hit by the France Télévision a car is actually from the region where I was born. So he became an instant hero in the Netherlands.
It's flat, right? Why do they come to the Alps in July?
Because we all ride a bicycle. I mean, there are more bicycles in the Netherlands than there are people. As soon as you can walk, I mean, I think even people start riding a bicycle before they know how to start walking. And it's a very popular sport in the sense that it's a very the whole population likes it. It's like skating and football. It's part of the Dutch and also the Flemish heritage, of course, or the Belgian heritage. And it has always been very popular. And then, of course, it's summertime. And in summertime, the Dutch go into the caravans and the camping cars to France.
We're almost out of time. Just in a word, Anne-Elisabeth, when you go to Britain, do you find yourself having to explain why the French watch a cycling race on TV?
I do this for a living all the time at the Telegraph. So, no, it's fun.
Okay, I want to thank you, Anne-Elisabeth. I want to thank Stéphane de Vries, Celestine Bolen, and Eric Fanner for joining us. I want to thank you for being with us for The World This Week. Stay with us. Coming up next, it's Business with Marcus Carlson. Just an update, by the way, on the news we'll be following at the top of the hour. Norway police say they believe there is a connection between the bombing in central Oslo and the shooting at a Labour Party youth camp that took place. At least 7 killed. That's the latest toll, according to the Newswires. More on this story at the top of the hour.